He said it the way people say things they've rehearsed in private, quietly, almost pleasantly, as if the words themselves were reasonable. "You didn't come here for Finn," my father said. "You came because you finally ran out of excuses not to." I held my champagne glass and let the sentence sit between us. The reception hall was warm and gold-lit, the kind of venue that costs more than it looks like it should. Strings of Edison bulbs hung above the dance floor. White peonies filled every table arrangement. Near the back of the room, a jazz trio played something soft and almost forgotten, the music drifting up into the vaulted ceiling. Around us, 100 guests talked and laughed and clinked glasses. Nobody was paying attention to the quiet scene by the bar, where my father and I were standing 2 feet apart for the first time in 19 years. I hadn't planned to be near him. I'd spent most of the evening on the other side of the room, watching my nephew Finn Dolan and his new wife navigate their first hour of marriage together with the kind of exhausted, luminous happiness that only weddings produce. They looked good. They looked right. I was glad I'd come. And then my father had crossed the room. He was older, of course. The hair that had once been a hard dark brown had gone completely silver. He moved more carefully than I remembered, with the slight deliberateness of a man who has recently been reminded that his body has opinions. But his posture was the same, shoulders back, chin level. The body language of a man who had never once doubted that the room arranged itself around him. "Dad," I said. He looked at me the way you look at something you've misplaced and aren't entirely glad to find. "You look the same," he said. It wasn't a compliment. "It's been 19 years, I said. I'd hope something changed. He picked up a glass of scotch from a passing tray. "Carrie didn't know you were coming. I told her last week." Something shifted in his expression. He filed that away. Then he said, "She didn't mention it to me." "I know." The jazz trio shifted into a slower number. Someone on the dance floor laughed at something, and the sound rose above everything else for a moment before settling back into the noise of the room. "You've been avoiding me," my father said. "I got here 2 days ago. I've been spending time with Finn." "That's not what I mean." He turned his glass slowly in his hand. "I mean for 19 years. "Yes," I said simply, "I have." He studied me for a long moment. There was something in his face I didn't recognize. Not anger, exactly, but something sitting underneath it. Whatever it was, he wasn't ready to let it surface. Instead, he gave a short exhale, the kind that carries an entire argument inside it. "You always had to do everything the hard way," he said. "I did things the way that made sense to me." "Selfish." He said it without heat, which was worse. "That's what I called it. You wanted what you wanted, and the rest of us, your family, were just obstacles." I took a slow sip of champagne. "You threw me out, Dad. I gave you a choice. You locked the door behind me. You walked away from this family." We looked at each other. The band shifted keys. "You know what people said?" he asked after a moment. "I can imagine. They said you burned out, that you went through all that schooling and couldn't handle the pressure." His eyes moved over me briefly. My dress, my hair, the absence of anything remarkable. I never corrected them. I almost smiled, because you believed it. He didn't deny it, which told me everything I needed to know. What he didn't know, what he'd had no reason to find out, because finding out would have required asking, was that in less than 5 minutes, the woman in the ivory dress at the head table was going to lift a microphone and say something that would dismantle every story my father had built about my life, since I drove away from his house at 11 o'clock, on a Tuesday night in August. But I didn't say that. I just stood there, holding an empty champagne flute, and let him finish. I was 22 the night I told my father I had been accepted to medical school. We lived in a small town outside of Raleigh, North Carolina, the kind of place where people knew your family's business before you did, and where what you became mattered almost as much as who you married. My father, Hugh Langford, had built a modest insurance business over 30 years through the kind of patient, relentless effort that earned genuine respect. He was not a cruel man in the ordinary sense. He loved his daughters the way some men love things they don't quite understand, at a distance, with a certain careful wariness. My younger sister Carrie had always moved more easily through that love. She knew how to be grateful without being suffocating, how to make our father feel useful without making him feel essential. She had an instinct for the shape of things. I did not. I was the one who asked why at dinner, who read through the night under a desk lamp my father said was ruining my eyes, who had, at age 11, announced that I wanted to be a surgeon, and meant it in the same serious, unqualified way that other children mean it when they say they want to be astronauts. Except that I never stopped meaning it. My father hadn't taken it seriously at first. Most parents don't. Then high school passed and I graduated near the top of my class and started talking about MCAT scores and hospital volunteering and pre-med tracks, and something in his face began to change. Not pride, something more like unease. Medicine is a long road, he told me once, during my junior year of college. I know, I said. 8 years of school, then residency, then fellowship, if you're doing something specialized. I know. By the time you're actually working, you'll be 35. Yes. He exhaled slowly, and you'd be alone for all of that. I looked at him. Dad, I'd be learning, building something. Building what? He asked. A career? Yes. He shook his head. That's not a life, Blythe, that's a delay. He believed that sincerely. That was the part I could never make him understand. He wasn't trying to diminish me. He genuinely believed that a woman spending her 20s in hospitals and lecture halls and on-call rooms was a woman losing something irreplaceable. He had grown up watching his own mother raise 4 children and call it a full life. He had watched my mother do the same thing. It had worked by his measure. It had been enough. But I had known since I was 17, standing in a pediatric ward during a school tour, watching a small child breathe through a ventilator while her parents held each other in the hallway. I had known then that there were rooms in the world that needed people willing to do the hardest possible work, and I wanted to be one of those people. The night I got my acceptance letter, I waited until after dinner. My mother was in the kitchen, the television in the den played at a low hum. My father sat in his armchair with reading glasses on and a magazine across his knee. I stood in the doorway and said, I need to tell you something. He looked up. He already knew it wasn't going to be simple. I got in, I said, the MD program at Carolina. I'm going to medical school in August. He took his glasses off. The silence was the kind that has weight. Blythe, he said. I've already accepted. He set the magazine on the side table very carefully, without talking to me. I talked to you. You told me to apply somewhere else. I told you to have a backup plan. This is my plan. My mother had drifted to the doorway. She stood there with a dish towel in her hands, looking back and forth between us, with the expression of someone watching a car approach an intersection too fast. My father stood. He was not a loud man. That was the thing about him that made it harder, not easier. When he was truly angry, his voice dropped and slowed, becoming precise the way cold things are precise. You will defer, he said. You will take a year. You will think about this properly. I have thought about it, for years. You have not thought about what you're giving up. Dad, I am telling you that if you walk into this decision without any sense of what comes after, chasing some idea you had when you were a child, you are going to regret it. And I am also telling you that I cannot support it. I looked at him carefully. What does that mean? It means this house, this family. We are not a rest stop. You don't get to leave and come back when it gets hard. I'm not planning to come back when it gets hard, I said. I'm planning to succeed. He said nothing. His jaw was set. He believed every word he had just spoken. I went upstairs. I packed what I could fit into 2 bags. I left before 10 o'clock. My sister Carrie called from her cell phone an hour later, outside, away from the house. He didn't mean it, she said. He did, I told her. She was quiet. Where are you going? A friend's place, I said, until I figure out next steps. Blythe. Carrie. I pulled over at a gas station and turned off the engine. The fluorescent lights above the pump were humming. Just tell him I'll call when there's something worth calling about. I hung up and sat there for a while, listening to the traffic on the state road. 3 months later, I sent a Christmas card home. I wrote a short note inside, nothing dramatic, just I started school. I'm okay. I hope you all are too, Blythe. The card came back 6 weeks later, unopened. On the front, in my father's handwriting, return to sender. I kept it. I don't entirely know why. I put it in a box with some other things from that part of my life, and moved it from apartment to apartment through 8 years of school and residency and fellowship, until the box got old and the tape dried out and I finally stopped pretending I would ever open it again. Some things you hold on to not because they comfort you, but because letting go of them entirely feels like a different kind of loss. Medical school was the hardest thing I had ever done, which is exactly what I'd been hoping for. I chose pediatric cardiac surgery because of a case I watched during my 3rd year, a 4-year-old with a congenital defect that 2 other programs had declined to operate. The attending on her case moved through the OR with the kind of focus that only comes from having made 1,000 decisions under pressure and survived being wrong a few times. She spoke quietly. She didn't perform for anyone in the room. She just worked, and that child went home to her family 3 weeks later. I was in the scrub room afterward when the attending passed me in the hallway. She stopped. "You have good hands," she said. "Do you know what you want to do yet?" "I do now," I said. She nodded once and kept walking. I did my residency in Pittsburgh, my fellowship in Boston. By the time I took my first attending position at a children's hospital, I was 33 years old, and I understood something my father had never believed was possible. I was exactly where I had always meant to be. The years blurred the way years blur when you are inside work that demands everything you have and gives back something you can't fully name. Surgeries, consultations. Cases that kept me awake not from anxiety but from the specific sacred weight of knowing that a decision I made today would determine whether a family stayed whole. I moved to Boston permanently. I bought a small house with a yard I rarely had time to manage. I learned to make peace with the particular quiet that comes with a life built almost entirely around purpose. I thought about my father occasionally, not often. The distance had become a kind of structure, and I'd stopped testing the walls. Until the letter from Finn arrived. My nephew Finn was 28 and the son of my sister Carrie, and I had met him exactly twice. Once when he was an infant, during the brief window before the estrangement had fully calcified, and once at a coffee shop in Durham when he was 19. When he'd found my contact information through Carrie and reached out on his own. He was curious and warm in the way that some people are simply born that way, and I had liked him immediately. The letter arrived on a Wednesday. His handwriting was careful and slightly slanted. "Dear Aunt Blythe," it began. "I've been thinking about writing this for a while and I keep finding excuses not to, so I'm just doing it. I'm getting married in April. Her name is Sienna Wentworth, and she's the best person I know. I would really like it if you came, even if things with Grandpa are still complicated. You're family to me. You've always been, even when no one talked about you. Finn?" I read it twice. Then I set it face down on my kitchen table and stood at the window for a long time watching the neighbor's dog walk in circles in the yard below. I was 41 years old. I was no longer afraid of my father. I was not sure what I was exactly. Curious maybe, the way you're curious about a scar you've had so long you've forgotten exactly where it came from. I wrote back to Finn, "I'll be there, thank you for asking. Blythe." At the reception my father had run out of easy accusations and moved on to something slower. "Your mother wanted to know if you were seeing anyone," he said. "I'm not." "She worries." "I know." He glanced around the room briefly. "She didn't come tonight, her hip." "I know, I visited her this morning." That surprised him. His eyes came back to me. "She didn't mention it," he said, "for the 2nd time this evening." "She showed me the garden," I said. "The hydrangeas are doing well." He absorbed this quietly. I could see him recalculating something, though I couldn't tell exactly what. Maybe just the fact that I had come here without announcement and without agenda, had spent a morning with my mother while he was somewhere else, and had moved through this town for 2 days without needing anything from him. "You've done all right for yourself," he said finally. It was the least he could offer. "Yes," I said, "I have." "Still at the hospital?" "Still at the hospital." He nodded once, slowly, the way people nod when they're not entirely sure what they're agreeing to. "Some small practice somewhere," he said, more to himself than to me. "That's what Carrie said, that you were busy." I didn't correct him. And then the lights near the dance floor shifted, and the jazz trio faded mid-phrase, and a tap on the microphone brought the room's attention to the head table, where my nephew's new wife was standing. Sienna Wentworth Dolan was a small woman with dark hair, and the composed expression of someone who had learned early in life to stand in front of people and say difficult things without flinching. She held the microphone with both hands and smiled at the crowd. "I know you're all ready for the first dance," she said warmly, and a ripple of laughter moved through the room. "I promise this won't take long. But there's something I need to say before we get there because it matters more to me than almost anything else happening tonight." My father exhaled quietly beside me. These toasts always drag on. I didn't respond. I was watching Sienna. Most of you know my little brother Leo, she continued. A teenager near the front table, lean and bright-eyed in a suit slightly too big for him, raised his hand with a grin, and the crowd laughed. What most of you don't know is what Leo's first few years of life looked like. The room quieted. Leo was born with a serious heart defect. Sienna's voice remained steady. By the time he was 2.5, we had been told by 2 different hospitals that his options were extremely limited, that we should. She paused, just briefly. Prepare ourselves. The room was completely still. When Leo was 3 years old, my parents drove him to a children's hospital in Boston for a consultation with a surgeon they'd been referred to. She looked down at the microphone for a moment. That surgeon told my parents she believed she could repair the defect, that the risks were real, but that she wanted to try. My father had stopped moving beside me. She spent 11 hours in that operating room, Sienna said. 11 hours. And Leo came home to us 3 weeks later. The teenager near the front was no longer grinning. He was looking at his sister with an expression that belonged in a quieter room. Leo is 18 now, Sienna said. He plays basketball. He argues about music constantly and eats everything in the refrigerator before anyone else has a chance. Another soft laugh from the crowd. And he is standing in this room tonight because of one person. She looked up then across the room and her eyes found mine. My father slowly turned his head, following her gaze. I found out 6 months ago, Sienna said, when Finn told me he was going to invite his aunt to our wedding. That Dr. Blythe Langford, the surgeon who saved my brother's life when he was 3 years old, is family. Her voice caught just once. She steadied it. I have wanted to say thank you in person for 12 years, and tonight I finally get to. She raised her glass. Would everyone please raise a glass to Dr. Blythe Langford? The room moved the way rooms move when something real has happened and everyone is feeling it at the same time. Glasses came up. Leo was on his feet before anyone else, and his face was the kind of open that 18-year-olds' faces are when they haven't yet learned to protect themselves from gratitude. The applause began, not polite applause, the kind that builds from somewhere genuine and keeps building. My father had not moved. He stood very still beside me, his glass at his side, his face doing something I had not seen it do in all the years I had known him. Nothing, no arrangement, no performance. Just a man standing in a room full of noise, trying to adjust to a fact that had arrived without warning. Sienna made her way across the floor. Leo followed. When she reached me, she set her glass down and put both arms around me without a word, and I held on. Thank you, she said. I've been trying to figure out how to say that for 12 years. You found a pretty good way, I told her. Leo shook my hand when she stepped back, a careful, serious handshake that meant something. He looked at me for a moment without speaking. Then he said quietly, My dad always said I should find you someday. I'm glad you didn't have to look very far, I said. After a moment I turned back to my father. He was still in the same place, looking at me. His expression had the quality of a man who has just been handed evidence that every conclusion he reached years ago was built on the wrong foundation, and who is still deciding what to do with that information. 19 years, he said. Yes. And he stopped. Started again. You saved that boy. I did my job, I said. I've been doing it for 19 years. He closed his eyes briefly, just for a second, then opened them. I didn't know, he said. You never asked. The sentence was quiet. It wasn't an accusation, and I didn't deliver it like one. It was simply the truth, offered plainly, and he received it the same way. He was silent for a long moment. Around us the reception was resuming. Music rising, the warm, complicated sound of a room full of people returning to celebration. Finn had appeared near the dance floor, reaching for Sienna's hand with the uncomplicated happiness of someone whose day had just become more than he'd hoped. Finally my father said, You've done real work. He said it slowly, with the gravity of a man revising something he had held for a long time. I assumed, I thought. I know what you assumed, I said. He looked at me then. Really looked, not at my dress or my posture or the glass in my hand, but at whatever 19 years had made of me. I'm glad you came, he said, tonight. I came for Finn, I said, and Sienna, and Leo, though I didn't know he'd be here. Yes, a pause still. He extended his hand. I looked at it for a moment. When I was 22, driving away from that house in the dark with 2 bags in my back seat and a gas station receipt on the passenger floor, I would have given almost anything for a different ending to that night. For a door that opened instead of closed. For a hand extended before it was too late to matter in the way it should have. But 22 was a long time ago, and I had stopped grieving that particular version of things somewhere around my mid-30s, in the middle of a night shift, when I had understood at last that the life I was building didn't have a gap in it shaped like my father's approval. I took his hand. His grip was firm and slightly uncertain, the grip of a man not sure what the gesture means but offering it anyway. "Take care of yourself, Dad," I said. Then I went to find my nephew and his wife, and spend the rest of the evening where I had come to be. Outside, much later, the night air was cool and carried the faint smell of lilacs from somewhere in the garden beyond the parking lot. The reception hall glowed behind me. Through the walls I could hear the band and the sound of dancing, and the particular noise a room makes when people are genuinely glad to be together. I stood there for a little while looking up. 19 years ago I left my father's house believing that the price of becoming who I was meant to be was permanent exclusion from the place I had started. That belonging was conditional. That love in my family came with terms that could be revoked. I had been wrong about one part of that, not the leaving. I had needed to leave, and I would leave again. But the exclusion wasn't permanent. It had just taken longer than it should have for the truth to find its way into the same room as the people who needed to hear it. You don't get to choose the moment when the life you built becomes visible to the people who doubted it. You just keep doing the work, and you trust that the work is its own kind of answer. And sometimes, if you're fortunate, you are standing right there when it arrives.